Fantastic. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our panelists for joining us. And we'll get started. So tonight's agenda is really going to be, I'll do basically like a 10 minutes of like, what is Citrus? What is Citrus Foundry? What are we doing? Little background for those of you who are joining us from outside of our community. We'll go to a panel discussion. Then we'll have pitches from our spring cohort startup teams, and then we'll do some breakout sessions for networking and discussion and wrap it up at a nice 6 o'clock and let everybody get off to dinner. So Citrus and the Bonato Institute is really an institute that spans 4 different campuses. We're the Center for Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society, big acronym, and the Bonato Institute. And we're primarily leveraging University of California's strengths to create information technology solutions for society's most pressing challenges. And a really important component of that mission is to make that people-centric so that these societal scale transformations are done in the most positive, kind of human-centered way possible. And the campuses that you can see were represented at Berkeley, Merced, Santa Cruz, and UC Davis. And we we advance our mission in 2 ways. So I'd break these into core research activities. You can see aviation, climate sustainability, health, people, and robotics. And then programs that are exploring the intersection of technology and society. So the Policy Lab, the Edge and Tech Initiative, which is expanding diversity and gender equity in technology, previously the Women in Tech Initiative, and Citrus Foundry, which is supporting technology innovators moving from lab to market. We're truly a multi-campus collaborative organization. We are able to connect innovators and researchers, faculty, PIs across multiple campuses with a robust selection of research infrastructure that meets the needs of their many and varied activities. You can see kind of a selection of the a lot of different things that are happening. I'll just highlight a few of those. So we have like the UC Davis Digital Health Testbed. We have our Invention Lab Makerspace that has supported Foundry teams launching and building and launching their first products. Dash Robotics is a good example. They did little bug robots, and I think built about 200 of them in that makerspace on UC Berkeley's campus. A multi-campus drone training academy, which led to the creation of our aviation research core and kind of a world-class nanofab at Marvell Nanolab, which is also located at UC Berkeley. You may have walked by it if you're in the engineering side of campus next to Sutar Chadai Hall. And amongst all of these kind of exciting activities sits Citrus Foundry. And our mission really is to empower top entrepreneurial scientists, researchers, engineers from the University of California to build transformative innovations that are going to have a significant impact on the world. And we're focused really closely on solving California's grand challenges, on accelerating careers in entrepreneurship, and in helping develop these emerging technologies. We do this through individualized one-on-one coaching, matchmaking, as needed to mentors in the, who are industry professionals as well as subject matter experts, entrepreneurship resources like the co-working space, office hours, legal support, things like that. And then a pretty large community of over 200 previous alumni founders and the broader cohort that folks enter into and get to join when they come into the Foundry. So far, we've supported over 125 projects. Those include nonprofits, grant-funded companies, and many venture-backed startups, and they've collectively raised over $220 million. About 30% of our teams have a faculty co-founder, and about 46% of our teams have a female co-founder, which I think are pretty good numbers represented in like deep tech, startup space, and so being part of an organization that has a Edge in Tech or Women in Tech initiative and just really trying to do targeted outreach to folks who otherwise don't necessarily consider themselves entrepreneurial or wouldn't take steps into that direction without folks saying, hey, come join us and be a part of this community. And really, I mean, this just is one snapshot of the many, many teams that we've supported, primarily composed of graduate students, postdocs, faculty who are really trying to take emerging technology, tech from their labs or their clinical experiences and moving that to commercial potential. Our main kind of social impact areas I would describe as infrastructure resilience, health and wellness, of which we have two folks from our panel who represent those two categories: digital transformation, climate and food, and equity and inclusion. We have more on that in terms of the different, maybe subtler social impact sectors, but I would say primarily out of the teams that we've supported, those shine through, and the types of technologies that people are using to address challenges in those spaces. Software, IT, AI, ML, obviously we're Center for Information Technology, but also we have folks in the biotech, life sciences space, genomics, folks who are combining AI, machine learning with sensors and electronics, a lot of software, hardware, kind of combined components, advanced materials, advanced manufacturing, that kind of digital transformation component. Maybe even kind of those unsexy problems like you're going to hear from one of our teams in the pitch session around portal management for original equipment manufacturers handling communications to suppliers. But big problem now, since so many things are digitized, the connection points between digitization is becoming a really big area for innovation, in my opinion. And our scrappy team of folks who I personally think are all very dedicated to supporting innovators and making an impact with technology entrepreneurship. So I'm Kira Gardner. I'm the director. We have Mikhail Holst, our innovation and entrepreneurship manager, who's got over a decade of experience in the impact entrepreneurship sector. Genevieve Pillai, who's our design and media student intern. She's a senior, I think, Genevieve, in cognitive psychology and or cognitive science, and Sarah Parks, who's in the IEOR department at Berkeley, handling operations and events for us. And I wanted to give a quick shout out to all of those resource partners and supporting folks who run office hours, provide Amazon Web Service credits, help folks navigate the entrepreneurship space, and really supply some of that expert mentorship that we're looking to bring into and provide to our founders and folks who are part of our community. With that, that is our quick summary of who we are, what we're about. If you do want to learn more, feel free to send us a note, check out our website, email us info@citrusfoundry.org. And I will move on to give a quick introduction to our panelists and then let them speak about the exciting things that they're doing themselves. So maybe we can spotlight our folks if we haven't done so already.
Yes, let me take care of that.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, I feel like I'm pretty on time right today. This is good. Trying not to ramble too much. Fantastic. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We have Tim Barrett. He's the CEO and co-founder of Gridware. You guys came through the Foundry spring 2020, working on power pole innovation technology. I'll let Tim talk a little bit more about that, but really focused on that infrastructure resilience component of social impact, and very relevant to the state of California. Rachel Cooperman, MD, CEO, co-founder of Eyes Inc. She came through Foundry in 2019 and is launching her first product soon, and is really basically trying to prevent anybody from having to deal with untreated seizures, especially in pediatric populations. She'll talk to you a bit more about that. And then we have Xiao Yang, principal at 50 years, and who's basically mandate from a company perspective, but also I believe in a personal perspective, is helping awesome people solve really big, hard problems with technology that can make huge, far-reaching impact. With that, I'd like to kind of pass it off to you guys. I'll call on you and you can give you like a little bit more of a dive into what you're working on and why it's exciting. Tim, maybe you can start.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kira, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm actually a former line worker. I spent time in the field climbing poles, stringing conductors. I then returned to university. I studied electrical engineering and computer science, both my undergraduate and graduate degrees at UC Berkeley. So I was fortunate enough to meet Kira and enter into the Citrus Foundry. Gridware develops a hardware device that permanently mounts to utility poles to detect and predict when they'll fail before they can ignite catastrophic wildfires.
Thanks, Tim. Can I send that on to you, Rachel?
Yes, so thank you so much for having me. So my background is I'm a pediatric epileptologist and spent 10 years working at UCSF running the Peds Epilepsy program in Oakland. And I started EYES with the goal of being able to understand what's happening to my patients outside of the hospital so we could get away from a trial and error approach to seizure management, epilepsy management. So the goal really is to improve outcomes for people with epilepsy, which haven't improved significantly in the last 30 years.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's just really, really fantastic to see people tackling areas that are kind of opaque and really challenging to make big strides in. So we'll dig a bit more into that, but Xiao.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining the session. My name is Xiao, also a UC Berkeley alum, studied mechanical engineering and material science, but what I really should have been doing is probably taking more showers while I was an engineer here, but I've since learned my lesson. I'm a principal at a venture capital firm called 50 Years. Our mission at a high level is we think of the world in three buckets. The first circle is we look for founders that are working in deep tech, which means that the founders typically have an advanced degree, like Tim or Rachel here, or they have deep specialized knowledge in a particular area. It's the kind of conversation you have where you walk away feeling super excited because there's probably only 3 or 4 people in the whole world that uniquely understand the problem and the solution that you're working on. Second circle for us is we're looking for opportunities that can span up to $1 billion in annual revenue. And it's not because we're crazy greedy or anything. It's because we're looking for those big global solutions where the product or technology can touch millions, if not billions of people all over the world. And then the third circle is we want to back founders solving the world's biggest problems, right? I don't give a shit about dog walking apps or how you make smoothies taste better for rich assholes. It's really much more about how do you fundamentally upgrade civilization? How do you take humanity to that next level? And so at that intersection, we love to support founders who are early stage, pre-seed, seed, give them the foundation to hopefully create one of the more iconic companies of the next 10, 20 years. Really looking forward to talking to all of you and hopefully answering any of your questions you might have.
Awesome. Thank you for that very candid outline of what you're working on. I appreciate the real talk in this because I think it's like, to me, I don't know, working like it isn't about what's the shiniest thing. It's like, okay, what is something that's really, really hard and how can we bring it to bear the best way possible? And kind of leaning into that, like deep tech, hard tech technologies are characterized often by these really long research and development timelines, but can make significant impact. So what led you to pursue these like kind of big, hard problems? Can you talk a bit more about that? And then how do you like maintain, I guess, momentum on something that maybe can take a while to see results in? Maybe I can pass that to you first, Rachel.
Sure. So I'm obviously in a regulated space in the medical device space, and that means you have to have a certain level of evidence. We cannot, despite Theranos being in the news, fake it until we make it. We really actually have to make it, test it, show that it's working and safe, and then sell it. So, I think what keeps me going really is my experience understanding the problem and understanding the breadth of the problem and the need. In the epilepsy space, we haven't as opposed to other disease states like oncology, for example, or diabetes, you have kind of two things at play there. One is you know who's sick and you know who's likely to die. And the second is that you have data to support that decision, that understanding, right? In the epilepsy space, people die and we don't expect it. So for example, Cameron Boyce passed away from sudden death in epilepsy, and he only had 3 seizures in his lifetime, right? So it was clearly missed and not understood that he had a high risk of death, because we just don't understand enough about the disease state. And part of the reason we don't is that we just lack any kind of fundamental data about how people are doing. As opposed to in diabetes, where you can check a hemoglobin A1C, you can understand who's having a hard time managing that. There is no hemoglobin A1C or a thermometer or other metric for epilepsy management, or most neurological disease management for that matter. And that's ultimately what's our guiding principle that we're working on. So the answer is, with these, you can't compare yourself to software companies that are, putting out the MVP and then iterating. It's a totally different space and process, and you have to find like-minded founders and people who understand that and can support that as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel. Can I throw the same question at you, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely. So why did I do this? Unfortunately, the problem doesn't need a lot of introduction. You just scroll down your news feed, maybe 3 or 4 articles down, you'll see, outages or fires ignited by the grid. That's really why I come to work and why all the people that work at Gridware come to work, because we want to see a future or create a future where wildfires are a thing of the past, especially suburban wildfires, which cause so much catastrophic damage. Now, because we are on safety and critical infrastructure, it's also very important for us to not fake it until we make it. And this is great because when you solve a really, really big problem that impacts so many people, and where one fire can cause $16 billion worth of damage, then it's a compelling reason to get together with a bunch of engineers, with a bunch of marketing, develop a team to go and solve this problem. And you can raise enough money to go out and do this properly. And so we were very fortunate enough to raise $5.3 million and then go out and build this. So we built a whole testing facility, an actual microgrid with real 45-foot poles and 200-foot spans of power line conductors. And we go out there and we drop vegetation on them and they combust. We push those poles to the ground, we explode transformers, and really testing the technology to its limits. And then we can turn around and provide the evidence to our customers and sell. And so I think really when you work in deep tech, generally, if you're working on a really important problem that's going to impact a lot of people, there are investors out there that are willing to support you in that.
Yeah, that kind of leads me to maybe, Xiao, you could address this, is like, how do you convince or how do you find the right people to support you from the financial side? Because, you have Rachel in these regulated industries, you have these kind of really slow sales cycles, you have the challenge of deep tech where you do have to show something before you can get funding. Like, what's your take on that? How do you think about it as an investor? And then how do founders approach that if they are trying to convince people to fund them before they really have a thing that is fully realized?
Yeah, I think it's important to define the problem or define the situation, so to speak, right? Like when we're talking about long-term research or long-term development, right? There's a huge difference between something that takes 10 plus years versus something that could happen in 5 to 10 year window. And I think if we're talking about something that can happen in a 5 to 10 year window, the financial system has a very robust and well understood way to do it. You just have to make sure that the risk reward curve makes sense, right? This is why for us, discussed, looking at those really, really large opportunities that can really shift humanity forward is part of the way we look for amazing founders in amazing spaces to make sure that the technology makes sense. I'd love to comment a little bit on the sort of the fake it until you make it mentality too. That whole concept is built off of, I think, a misunderstanding of what it means to be a successful founder, right? This is a world where, you inherently have only a very small population of people doing it the right way. And that kind of fake it till you make it mentality stems from the fact that people don't really understand what kind of storytelling and visionary approach you need to really create the momentum behind these ideas. Yes, of course, these things are risky and they take a long period of time, and they need the kind of storytelling and visioning to get people excited and on board. But you shouldn't have to cross that boundary into lying to people or faking it, right? And again, it's easy and it's tempting to go that route, but the best founders are able to convince people with charisma and energy and almost create that sense of inevitability there without crossing that line.
I kind of want to ask about, how do you balance the charisma and the individual founder, like special sauce versus the technology and the impact that they can make in that space? Would you, because to me, sometimes you might have somebody who has a really, really great problem and a really, really great expertise, but they don't necessarily have a huge amount of charisma to convince people about that. What do you say to that?
Yeah, like my favorite kind of movie is a heist movie. And the start of every heist movie is when they find all the crazy people on the team that can do it, right? You got the explosives expert and the person that can hijack a bus and all these kind of things, right? This is why teams exist. That's why typically it's so hard to do something as a solo founder. And I'm not saying that a technical founder can't do all of this. In fact, one of our core tenets is that we believe that amazing technical founders can be trained and practice and become excellent business people and CEO as well. But it's also at the same time perfectly reasonable to assume that it's not something that can be enveloped all under one person. And, of course, you have complementary teams where people are good at doing X, Y, and Z. And it's that whole massive community of people, even extending beyond the founders, that ultimately make these companies successful. It's very much a team effort. Does that kind of make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes perfect sense. I kind of jumping off of that, Rachel, Tim, I would love to know, maybe this is moving a little bit to left field, but how did you find your co-founders and those people who add that other half to you to really get this moving? Because I know from both of you, those people were really kind of key players.
I can speak to that first. I have two co-founders. So one of them was a research co-founder who I did the initial clinical studies with. And my father is a professor at Scripps Oceanography, and he was his postdoc. So I knew he was well trained. And his background's in signal processing. My other co-founder is, I hired him actually as a consultant to help me find eye tracking partners as I was starting out. It was a skill set I didn't have, how to find the right people within a corporation to develop appropriate partnerships. And we started out on a 3-week contract, and then he just kept working. He really fell in love with the problem and ultimately became a co-founder. And it was, and I would say they were both really long-term relationships that I think are going to continue to succeed.
I can answer this question logistically. I met them at Berkeley. Prabal, who was my faculty advisor, Omar, who's director of operations, and Hall, who's our director of engineering, all I met during my courses or clubs at Berkeley. But I think the real question here is why? What draw you to these co-founders? And that's a difficult question to answer. And even what draws you to the hires that you make? And I think it just really comes down to, is this person genuine? Every single person that works at Gridware is genuine, goes above and beyond, is willing to step forward, but also step back and listen. And most importantly, is humble. And this is how I ended up choosing the people that I work with. I'm fortunate enough to work with every single day. And most importantly, they're a lot smarter than I am. I have the opportunity to learn from every single person on my team every single day, and it helps me grow as an individual. And I love coming to work.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you guys for sharing. I think that's a much better or the harder question, Tim, which is like, how do you choose these people, not just how do you find people? Well, so like kind of following a previous thread, which is you have these really fantastic people, you have this really chewy, hard problem. How does the world look if you're wildly successful, like with your most ambitious goals for your company, or maybe even for the space? Feel free to kind of answer either or both. Maybe we can just throw that at you, Tim, and then Rachel, you can jump in.
I like to say that I'm always surprised when the lights come on. Working out in the field and seeing all the components required to work in harmony for our lights to turn on, it baffles me every time. I'm always like, okay, is the light going to come on now that I switch it? I think that's abnormal for people. But what we're going to see now increasingly is that not be as reliable. And so if we're successful, we continue to have the reliability that we've enjoyed for many, many years, and see a huge increase in the reliability of electricity. And there aren't any more wildfires ignited by the grid. People's lives are not lost. They don't lose their homes, their history, their memories.
Yeah, I think anybody who's living in California right now can really empathize with that problem and is right behind you with that vision.
So my goal really is to develop a thermometer for neurological disease, so that we can understand how somebody is doing at baseline, how therapy changes how they're doing, and ultimately how we can improve treatments so that we can make people better faster. And without a way to measure, it's very hard to improve things, as you all know. So that's really our vision, is to stop guessing really and start measuring and understanding disease.
Xiao, do you want to jump in on like what, I mean, these are two examples, but in like you have this like kind of meta level perspective on what technologies are out there and what impact founders who are coming from this deep tech sector can make.
Yeah, I mean, I think the overall vision is you prove to the larger world that it makes a lot of sense to back great founders like Rachel and Tim, right? I picture this giant hose, and there's just like cash spewing out, and some of it's going to stupid stuff like cat NFTs and things like that. That doesn't help our society in any meaningful way, I don't think. I'd love to shift that pipe so that more of that money is directed into things like curing cancer or fighting wildfires, or decreasing child mortality and all those kind of things. And you do that with funds like 50 Years being wildly successful and showing people that, hey, you can make actually the most money by doing the most good in the world. And if you can just fundamentally prove that point, that's how you fundamentally shift capitalism and make that a vehicle for good, right? There's a longer debate about how you structure civilization and whether capitalism is the right model. But I think what I'm passionate about is let's use the existing machinery in the best way possible, and then we can somehow change society slowly and incrementally in other ways.
I'd love to get maybe one more question for you on that, like just looking in the last year, the shift of venture capital funding for like female founders went down. It's not a huge percentage to begin with, but the funding for startups went up, right? And then you have spaces like femtech or women's health technologies that I do think you can make a really, really compelling business case for the size of that market impact. And we're still not seeing investment in those spaces. Like, what's up with that?
Yeah. This is I'm probably not the best person to talk about it, but I'll give you my perspective, right? 50 years, we have a female founder. That's not something that a lot of other firms can talk about. And really, if I can just even broaden this, right? Why don't more PhDs get funding? Why don't more deep tech startups get more funding, right? And surprise, surprise, when you look across the table, who's on the other side when you're in a VC meeting, right? Is it just people that have an investment banking background or worked in finance their whole life? And so there's a whole ecosystem shift that needs to happen before all this machinery can properly process the ideas and the people and the cool things that need to happen to make our civilization a better place. And so that's why we run programs like PhD to VC. Like, let's try to diversify who is on the other side of the table, be it women, be it people with different backgrounds, be it deep tech people, be it grad students, right? This is important to create a fundamental change. I mean, people at the end of the day, we're talking about something very psychological. If you don't understand something or you don't recognize the person across from you, it starts from ignorance, but that ignorance is a fine line, just a leap away from fear. And when you're fearful, you just say no, and that stops a lot of progress from happening.
Yeah. No, I think your perspective on that sounds right on, especially with this last year, making people more reticent to take risks beyond the most familiar, comfortable thing.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I would say, in terms of that, like Tim, maybe, and Rachel, do you guys have any tips and feedback that you would give like your younger selves, or maybe those scientists, those engineers, those folks who are potentially considering trying to tackle some big problem, like with those barriers and those challenges that they're facing? Like, what would you tell them?
Mentoring. I mean, I think that's what it really boils down to, is surrounding yourself with people that can give you honest feedback and help you see maybe the holes in your storyline or the weaknesses in your argument, and boost you up when you need it. The other aspect, I think, is being able to tell a compelling story, speaking to specifically kind of your strength, that you've shown that you can do this. So for example, obtaining grant funding, peer-reviewed papers, it's a lot harder to argue with someone when, clearly there is support within the community for what it is that they're doing. I think part of the challenge is that when you're coming from a more technical background, like I did, you're just, I'm used to having conversations with people about, so the pros of being on this medicine are this, and the cons are this, and let's come up with a joint decision-making process. And that's not the language of entrepreneurship. So, I mean, to a certain extent, just like you spend time learning the language of engineering or medicine, you have to spend time learning the language of entrepreneurship so that you can succeed. And that's been part of the journey for me.
I think I'm going to expand a little bit on what Rachel said about mentorship, because I think really what that comes down to is challenging your assumptions and your biases. And so you rely on the mentors to kind of, who've been longer, who have more life experience, to filter that and provide you with advice or direction, or perhaps ask you the right questions. And really what you should try to do, or the advice that I would give, is to test out those assumptions with as many people as you can. And so that involves not just speaking to people that you respect or look up to or that have been successful, but really speaking to as many people as you can in areas that you wouldn't. Some of the best advice or information or data points that I've received have come from the most unexpected places, outside of the engineering buildings, in the field, or with people in an Uber. One of my Uber drivers, I've had immensely great conversations with Uber drivers. I think it's just about being really passionate about the problem, a specific problem that you're trying to solve, and then really deeply learning about what that problem is. You're going to have a whole set of biases and assumptions about that problem and how you might think about solving it. And I think it's important to divorce yourself from that as much as possible, for as long as possible, and try to get as much information from as much people as possible. So yeah, that's kind of what I would advise myself again to do.
No, I love that because I feel like it kind of like on the other side of it, like echoes what Xiao was saying around challenging your biases and assumptions means you have to get out of your comfort zone and you have to stay, you have to like divorce yourself from what is the easiest path or obvious path to you. Cause that like, I don't know, I feel like hearing you guys that's what to me, innovative ideas come from that, right? That intersection of something that needs to change or a challenge with some unexpected insight. And where are you getting those insights and how are you creating opportunities to be, surprised? Yeah, we have one question. This kind of goes back to from the audience that says how do you think the lack of investments in female founders impacts innovation? I might kind of echo what Xiao says, or you can take that, which is it impacts it because then you're not getting people with those perspectives thinking about either the problems or the solutions from that lens. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Maybe from your either your perspective, Tim, Rachel, Xiao, feel free to jump in.
I mean, 50% plus of people are women, first of all, and an increasingly high percentage of advanced degree holders and college grads are women, right? Like, if we're not supporting this like amazing community of people, right, like we're missing out as civilization. And on top of that, study after study has consistently shown that diverse teams way outperform non-diverse teams. And so if you're missing a woman in the boardroom, a woman in the management team, then potentially even good ideas that get funding are not going to meet their potential or are going to wither on the vine and don't get the chance to reach what could be a civilization altering thing. We're fundamentally slowing down our progress as a species, I think.
So I think as a female founder, I can speak from experience, it's very hard when you're on the journey to know what is related to you and your personal challenges becoming the best entrepreneur you can versus, I'm a woman. I've never been, let's say I've never shied from difficult things. I was a physics major. I'm not scared of STEM in any way. But I do think that there are certain cultural norms that women take on that we don't even recognize. My husband is a tax litigator and we talk about pitches once in a while. And he's like, well, why don't you just go in there and tell them you're going to be the next best technology? I'm like, that doesn't come out of my mouth. Like, it's just, we speak differently. And I think that's one of the important things that mentorship can help you overcome is learn how to speak in the language of entrepreneurship if you've been culturally taught not to speak that way for a significant portion of your life.
Which probably parallels a little bit some engineers and scientists background. You're not learning that language either. I would love to ask what the technology or innovation or even maybe the problem that you're the most excited about. We can move it to that side of things that is in your space that you would like to see solved. Like, what are you most excited about that's not your innovation, your problem space, but something like that you've seen or are familiar with and you think, other folks aspiring to entrepreneurship should tackle? Tim, maybe?
Yeah. Putting me on the spot here. What's
Yeah.
what's the next $1 billion idea?
Yeah, Tim, tell us.
Yeah.
Situational awareness of customer behavior in terms of their electricity loads within the home. So for us to transition to the clean energy future, several things have to happen. We have to completely change the way that we generate, store, and consume electricity. We need to do that smarter. If you think about your home, you leave your toaster plugged in, there's a little light there, you have your TV on, you have all of these different appliances running. When do you choose to run your dryer or your fridge? there's no real way for us to balance the load, and we could. There's humongous amounts of opportunity to dial up a refrigerator at 1 o'clock, and then the next door neighbor does it at 2 o'clock, and the next door neighbor does it at 3 o'clock. To unlock this kind of intelligent balancing of demand, if I was going to start on a new problem to be solving, I would be trying to help provide that intelligence and that awareness of how electricity is consumed behind the meter, within the home, within the business. Because just with one single thing, the Nest thermostat changed the game. And that's just one thing. Now imagine what we could do if everything was connected. And it's critical and necessary for us to realize the future where you have several neighborhoods connected, and they all generate electricity, they all store energy, and they all share and transact energy. It's a missing piece that hasn't been solved.
I think that was a pretty good answer, Tim. We're on the spot.
And now that I've had time to think
About it.
So, I mean, I ultimately think that there's two issues. One is the, social determinants of health, basically our socioeconomic status and zip code determine our lifespan. And then the second one is fee-for-service medicine, right? So fee-for-service medicine is incentivized to keep you sick. So that's all you need to know, is that the incentives are aligned not with keeping you well. And sadly, we've been talking about value-based care for my entire career, and only 15% of the United States is value-based care. So, until we start addressing these bigger problems and stop spending money on unnecessary tests that put money in people's pockets, things aren't going to really get better. But I don't know how you fix those two big problems at least with entrepreneurship. I can think of how you might change it other ways.
Yeah, no, pay for performance is, huge challenge. And I think it's not a space that folks have a lot of insight into in their everyday lives. Everybody has health insurance or knows when they don't have health insurance, but they don't really explore that as a problem space from an entrepreneurial perspective. So really, really interesting.
It's interesting how there's a lot of parallels between what we're working on and what Rachel is working on. We're essentially predictive health instead of reactive health.
Xiao, any thoughts on what you think? What's the thing that is like your pet problem?
Man, this is probably not okay to say in this kind of forum, but I would love to form like an eco-terrorist organization and like create the kind of like negative consequences in the world, right? Like right now, there's no negative consequences like dumping shit into the ocean, right? I'd like to program one of those like robot dogs to go and like shoot up that factory. You're not to hurt people, but like create the economic negativity so that you actually create the incentives for people to stop doing bad things. Right now we don't have any of that. There's no economic model to enforce that, right? Like it'd be great to have dogs, those robot dogs around the Amazon rainforest, and maybe they can inject like radioactive pellets into the ground and make it like crazy radioactive around there so that people can't tear down that forest or grazing land. I don't know. This is some crazy shit.
I was going to say maybe like policy to limit.
Yeah, that's the right thing to say. Yes. See, Kira, you're public ready. Yeah, I am not.
Policy that says, okay, there's going to be an economic downside to not being socially responsible in your capitalistic endeavors.
Yeah, that's right. And you're seeing that happen in some places like, New York City just did a carbon tax for the built environment. And for the first time, if you're constructing buildings or managing buildings, you have to really look at that stuff. And man, immediately there, people want, carbon measurement, methane measurement. They care about the materials they put in, right? That economic framework's in place. I wish that could be everywhere for everything.
That's great. Well, I think we're coming up on time. Maybe I can give you guys each like a last closing statement, sentiment. How might you inspire people to kind of take like the risks that you did? I think that there whether you identified it as more rewarding to pursue this path. I know, Tim, we've talked about this or not, but what it might like leaving people, what do you want to leave people with from your perspective and your lens?
I would say that I was really scared when I started out. I really didn't know what the path entailed. And it was very hard to think of, starting a company to raising money, to getting a product to market, I think that just one step at a time, customer discovery, figuring out what you need to do next, keeping your eye on your goal, but not turning yourself, not doing it because you don't think you can get there. It's really just a series, a mile is just a series of steps, right? And that's exactly what it is. And you just don't, it's not like college where, you take this class and that class and then you're all done. It's suddenly like, hey, now I don't have a path. I need to figure it out. I think it's well worth it. And it's, for me, intellectually, it's been an amazing journey. So don't think that, coming from academics, you think that there's the be all end all is the postdoc or the academic position. There is a whole world out there beyond it.
Thanks, Rachel.
Next, entrepreneurship is very difficult, very challenging, very hard. I think when entrepreneurs are successful, they're highlighted, and then it leaves people thinking, oh, am I capable of doing something like that? Well, I'll share a little insight based on my personal experience. The first pitch that I ever gave, I got about 3 minutes in, and this was in front of a large group of people. I froze. I didn't know what to say. I sat down. It was the most embarrassing moment of my life. And I didn't believe that I could ever be an entrepreneur. But I had no choice. I exhausted all different ways that I could think of to solve this problem. And the only one that remained was entrepreneurship. And so I think it's important to be honest with yourself about why it is that you want to be an entrepreneur. And if you go down the list and it's not because you have a burning desire to solve this problem, then yeah, I would revisit the problem that you're trying to solve because it is very, very challenging. And it's the only thing that's going to keep you going when things seem impossible.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you.
I think we can all share horror stories.
That's just one.
I once pitched and felt like Cinderella, like rushing from the ball. Like I had this, like, I must flee this place right now feeling. So yes, you need other entrepreneurs so that you can all have, a support group for all the
stuff that doesn't go in the news.
Stuff.
Yeah, the stuff that doesn't get highlighted in the press pieces.
Yeah, like that SBIR score that you don't want to tell anyone about.
Well, Xiao, do you have any last thoughts for these folks?
Yeah, I'd love to continue on that theme of support, right? Yeah. California is a weird place. It's expensive. The ground shakes here, and yet people keep on streaming over here. Like, why is that? I think there's still something pretty special about Silicon Valley in particular, in that you can email some random person or a CEO or some other founder, and 50% chance they actually email back, and there's a genuine intent to pay it forward and to help each other. Because at the end of the day, the greatest industry that came out of this region is other billion-dollar industries. And that came about because we were willing to help each other and work hand in hand. And we believed in taking risks and supporting each other in a really powerful way. And to take it, I guess, one step further and make it more specific to this group, if you are thinking about starting something or already starting something and you need help, like, talk to some of the people here, like email me, like, reach out to folks that can be useful and try to have that kind of earnest conversation, find people that you can have that safe space with and really have that vulnerable conversation. Those end up being the most valuable things. Otherwise, right, like, I don't know why you'd pay $5,000 to live in this place.
with that, I think that's a fantastic cap. Find your community. We are here. We're a community of folks doing hard things with really fantastic people that are, in my opinion, always like to be surrounded by people that are smarter than me and doing harder, more amazing things like Tim and Rachel, Xiao. Thank you so much for your insights, for your candid conversation. And folks who are interested in following up with any of our panelists can check the chat. And I will be following up with some information post-event. With that, we can move to the next activity, which is hearing about what our current teams from our spring group are working on.